Welcome, everyone. You've stumbled upon Esoteric Babble. Today, we're going to talk about a daily practice, which I think about in two broad categories. I think throughout the day, we should meditate and we should give. I think those are two very important pillars. And from that, we can sort of expand what we do. I should say this sort of practice is something that is highly personal. It's something that everyone has to tailor for her or his self. We all have different amounts of time and a lot of different responsibilities and pressures and obligations and so on and so forth. So I just want to map out a very general sort of practice that I think overall is something that would work for everyone to some extent. And like I said, I think you can bring it to these two sorts of pillars of meditating and giving. We can always, if you are in any way Buddhist or read about Buddhism, you can always check you can check what you do during your day with something like the Eightfold Path and see if your actions, your thoughts, your intentions, your effort, if it sort of is at the level that you think it should be. I mean, that's the nice thing about the Eightfold Path. It's a good checklist, and it's just something that we can use. We could use it every day. We could use it sort of haphazardly when it comes to mind, but certainly daily we could check and sort of see, how we're doing against that. But even more broadly, I think we could divide sort of what we do. We could think of our day as either being spent meditating or being spent in mindful activities, so that whatever we do, that we're trying to be there and not let our mind sort of run away from us. And that another part of the meditation practice is that we're trying to tame the mind. I mean, that is in the Dhammapada, the famous passage about how carpenters work with wood and well diggers or irrigators, they direct water, and maybe arrowsmiths bend arrows or make arrows. But the wise tame the self. And that is something that meditation is. Meditation is a tool to help us tame the self. And I think meditation actually is something that the fruit of meditation can be born in our actions. But we could also mention that these are not necessarily, when we include that concept of mindfulness, and actually you can always be meditative, like the Buddha said, we'll say person, but a monk, but a person who's walking knows I'm walking. If a person is breathing out long, that person knows I'm breathing out long. We can always be sort of in a state of mindfulness and in a state of meditation. And we could always be giving somehow. And I think that the meditation, the giving of ourselves has sort of the same goal as meditation, and that is trying to tame the self. The more we give, the less likely we are to just, we're trying to cling less to the physical world, to materiality. If we consume less, we're clinging less to materiality, and we are sort of eroding that primal egoic reflex that says I have to have. And to be honest, just a kind of an aside, I think that our basic egoic sense has, developed over tens of thousands of years, and probably much, much longer. And it developed in a matrix, if you will. It developed in an environment where there was a certain amount of balance. I mean, people, if you imagine living in a cave or a forest, and maybe your only shelter is a cave or some sort of, who knows, just the canopy of a tree. What you crave is probably just about what's going to keep you alive. And these days, you can sort of look upon what happens with advertising as a very dark art, a very sort of black magic that is tapping into that egoic reflex and kind of spurring us on to crave and to consume, to buy, and consequently to sort of go into debt and overextend and have all sorts of thoughts of negativity and how can we say, like, feelings of inadequacy. My house isn't as big as this other person's house, or I don't have enough cars, or and it may seem silly, but we're all affected and afflicted. We're all sort of bombarded by by this black magic, and that's a good way if you think about it that way. If you think about advertising as a very dark art, we could actually appreciate the, in any art, I suppose we can appreciate the genius of the artistry, but we have to realize that advertising is basically pernicious, particularly when it is tricking us into thinking we need things that we don't need. So something about meditation and giving. Meditation allows us to find a center and allows us to find contentment in the moment. And giving allows the sense of ego to sort of, we realize like, oh, we don't have to be a slave to that egoic reflex. And that's why broadly I think that these two practices can not only be seen as like the two sort of pillars overall, but they can be seen as they can be seen almost to be operating at the same time. And lastly, I would just say that when we meditate, we're trying to find our center, we're kind of soaking in energy, or maybe you could think about it that way, or we're trying to uncover this radiance that we are, that we've obscured by sort of the muddy waters of thought. And I think the more we meditate and the more we give, but the more we find a center and the more we calm ourselves, the more likely it is for this radiance to shine. And, this you could meditate upon the sun, the major arcanum card of the tarot, the sun. We want the source to emit. And, life is really brutal for some people. And it isn't always brutal for people in a very noticeable way. There could be all sorts of issues people face that are just not in any way noticeable. There could be all sorts of abuse or just tragedy just right behind a face you meet. So I think we should all strive to uplift each other. We should offer kind words, non-divisive speech. We should try to unite, not separate. It doesn't mean that we should, we shouldn't at the same time tolerate things like racism or injustices. But whenever possible, we should try to unite people. We should try to build bridges between all kinds of people. Everyone you meet, to some extent, we should try to, find our common humanity and find ways of, at least, it's not likely that any of us are not going to create karma. So if we're going to create karma, why don't we create some good karma? And that is basically what I have to say. I would be very interested in other people sharing their opinions, and not only their opinions, but their experiences. And like I said, this is very general. When we get into the specifics of life, it's not always so easy. There's lots of things. There are a lot of areas where, even though we want to lessen the self, we don't want to get taken advantage of. And that isn't necessarily because of the self. There are times when you could be taken advantage of, and you kind of have to ask yourself. This is where the wisdom that comes from meditation can be helpful, because we want to discern whether when we're being taken advantage of, is it somehow playing into some larger purpose of sort of subjugating people, or is it just simply that maybe we don't like the fact that we're doing more work than a coworker? There are, it isn't necessarily easy to know all of these things, and it's certainly not something that someone can prescribe for us. This is where we, as we go through our lives, we're the ones who have to figure that out. And when you look back, you realize you might have done things differently later on. But that is what growth is about, and that is how right view ever becomes deepened. And on that note, I will sort of bring this to a close. Like I said, I will say it one more time. Please share any experiences or opinions you have on daily practices. Peace, and may all beings everywhere be happy.